Wyoming territory. The year was 1883. The wind came down from the north like it was owed a debt, a screaming, invisible predator that clawed the snow from the high plains of the Red Willow Basin. It did not just blow, it scoured. It peeled the bark from the oldest pines and polished the granite outcrops until they gleamed like bone in the flat. Gray light. The sky was a lid of pressed iron, heavy and suffocating, promising nothing but an eternity of cold. Through this frozen hell, a single, dilapidated wagon carved a desperate line. Its wheels shrieked a high, thin protest against the ice-packed trail, a sound like a rabbit caught in a snare. The horse, a gaunt creature with ice clinging to its mane, lowered its head against the stinging horizontal snow. Inside the wagon's skeletal frame, Eliza Thorne was dying. She was 19 years old, and the cold had already claimed her extremities. She sat huddled in the wagon bed, a space that offered no meaningful shelter. The canvas roof above her was split and torn, the gaps letting in fistfuls of driving snow that melted on her neck and refroze. She was wrapped in a threadbare blanket that felt like a sheet of ice itself. Beneath it, she wore only a thin cotton chemise and a skirt stiff with frost. Her feet, long past the point of pain, were wrapped in scraps of linen, a futile gesture against the biting -20-degree air. She had watched, with a distant sort of horror, as the skin on her knuckles split open. She could no longer feel the cracks. Her lips were not blue, they were a deep, bruised purple, drawn back from her teeth. The shivering, the violent, uncontrollable shaking that had racked her body for the first 5 hours had stopped. A dull, heavy lethargy had replaced it. This, she knew from travelers' tales, was the end. The final warmth. At the front, driving the horse, sat Mason Pike. He was her mother's brother, the only family she had left in the world. The stench of cheap corn whiskey rolled off him, a sour miasma that somehow cut through the sharp, clean scent of the frozen air. He was taking her to the railroad camp. He was taking her to be sold. He turned, his face obscured by a scarf and the brim of his hat, but his voice was clear, gravelly with drink and profound spite. "Should have gotten $50 for you," he muttered, addressing the storm itself. "50 hard dollars. Now this damn blizzard cuts the price in half, if they'll even take you." Eliza did not answer. Her jaw was locked. To speak would be to shatter. Mason suddenly, violently, yanked the reins. The horse stopped, whinnying in protest, its breath exploding in a cloud of steam. The wagon slid sideways, its wheels screeching. They were nowhere. There was no outpost, no shelter, not even a landmark, just an endless howling expanse of white, defined by the black, skeletal trunks of pines. To the right of the wagon, the ground fell away into a deep drift, a hollow carved out by the wind. "Out," Mason growled. Eliza looked at him, her mind slow, syrupy with cold. The word did not register. "I said, get out," before she could react, before she could plead. He was in the back of the wagon. His movements were clumsy with alcohol, but fueled by a sudden, vicious rage. He grabbed the front of her chemise. The frozen cotton ripped in his fist. "You ain't worth the feet it takes to get you there," he snarled. He seized her by the arm. His fingers dug into the frozen flesh of her bicep like metal clamps. She felt a distant, dull pressure, but no pain. There was no warning, no time to brace. He shoved her. Eliza tumbled backward out of the wagon, a weightless, brittle thing. She landed hard. The impact drove the air from her lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. The snow was not soft. A thick crust of ice covered the drift, and she broke through it, plunging up to her waist in the freezing powder beneath. The cold was a physical blow. It was 1,000 knives. It was a fire that burned. She looked up, choking, snow filling her mouth. Mason stood on the wagon bed, staring down at her. His face was a mask of indifference. He had already dismissed her. He had already calculated his losses. "Waste of time," he spat. The wind snatched the words away. He turned, grabbed the reins, and cracked the whip over the horse's back. The animal lunged forward. The wheels shrieked as they bit into the ice. The wagon moved. Eliza tried to scream. No sound came out, only a dry, desperate hiss. She watched the wagon pull away. It was her only link to life, a hateful, terrible link. But it was all she had. It shrank into the swirling gray, becoming a smudge. And then it was gone. The silence that fell was absolute. It was heavier than the snow, broken only by the high, thin keen of the wind moving through the basin. She was alone. She was sinking, panic, cold and sharp. Tried to rise, but the lethargy beat it down. There was only one instinct left: move. She clawed at the edge of the drift, her hands, raw and bleeding from cracks she could not feel, found purchase on the icy crust. She dragged herself out, her legs numb and useless. She fell onto her stomach on the packed snow of the trail. The wind hit her sodden chemise and skirt, freezing the fabric solid in seconds. She tried to stand, but her legs collapsed. She began to crawl. She had no direction, no plan. Then, through the blinding snow, she saw it, a smudge, a darkness against the white, perhaps 100 yards away. A shadow in the side of a low rise. It was a chance. She crawled. Each movement was agony. The frozen crust tore at her knees and hands. She kept her head down, fighting the urge to simply lie down and let the sleep take her. The world narrowed to the few feet of white in front of her. The shadow resolved into a shallow opening, a hunter's cave, barely more than an overhang in the rock. She dragged herself over the threshold, collapsing onto the frozen dirt floor. It offered little more than a respite from the wind. It was dark, and the air inside was just as cold as the air outside. In the center, a small ring of stones held the charred remains of a fire. Eliza plunged her hands into the ashes. Desperate, they were stone cold. A faint, stale smell of smoke lingered, maybe from last month, a ghost of warmth that only mocked her. She slumped against the rock wall, pulling her knees to her chest. The cold was inside her now, a deep, heavy predator. She was fading, but not yet, with fingers that felt like clumsy wooden sticks. She reached inside the torn bodice of her chemise. She pulled out a small, oilcloth pouch. It was all she had. Inside, 3 things: a letter from her mother, the paper worn thin at the creases, the ink faded but the words memorized, a single, heavy coin, pressed in the year she was born, and a length of ribbon, a beautiful, impossible shade of slate blue, saved from a dress her mother had worn long ago. She clutched the pouch to her chest. This was her identity. This was the proof that she was Eliza Thorne. Not just a piece of property worth $50, not just a body freezing in a cave. A sound cut through the wind. It was high, mournful, and terrifyingly close. A wolf. Another answered it. Farther east, they were hunting, drawn by the weakness of the storm. They could smell her. The terror finally cut through the numbness. It gave her a last, desperate jolt of adrenaline. She could not die here. Not like this. She forced herself back to her knees. She crawled out of the shallow cave. The snow was falling faster now, thick, heavy flakes that plastered themselves to her hair and face. She looked back. The tracks she had made crawling to the cave were already softening, the edges blurring. In 10 minutes, they would be gone. She would be gone. She staggered to her feet, leaning against the rock face for support. She saw a shape through the blizzard, a snapped pine tree. Its trunk splintered, about 20 yards away at the edge of the gully. It was no shelter, but it was a goal. She pushed off the rock. Each step was a guess. Her feet, wrapped in the frozen linen, found no purchase. She fell, pushed herself up, fell again. Her lungs felt like they were being scraped raw with pumice stone. The air was too cold to breathe, too thin to matter. She reached the tree. She slid down its rough bark, collapsing into the drift that had formed at its base. She pulled the pouch from her dress again. Holding it tight, she closed her eyes. The howling of the wolves seemed to be inside her head now. She was so very tired. The white was becoming soft, inviting. It would be so easy to sleep. On the opposite slope of the basin, Cole Reddick leaned into the wind. He was coming back from the salt run to Hickory Bluff, his pack horse trailing behind his gelding. He owned the Red Willow Ranch, a spread that was too big, too empty, and too hard to work alone. The cold was a familiar enemy. He hated this wind. It found every gap in his shearling-lined coat. Suddenly, his dog, Juniper, stopped. She was a mix of shepherd and something wilder, a silent, serious animal that rarely made a sound unless it mattered. Now, she lifted her head, her ears flat. A low, urgent howl ripped from her throat, a sound Cole had not heard in a year. "What is it, girl?" Cole scanning the tree line. "Coyotes." Juniper ignored him. She bounded off the trail, plunging chest deep into the snow, heading directly for a deep gully on the far side of the creek bed. "Juniper, back!" The dog did not listen. Cole cursed, turning his horse to follow. If a wolf pack was cornering a deer, he did not want his dog in the middle of it. He spurred his horse through the drifts, Juniper a black shape plunging through the white ahead of him. She stopped at the base of a splintered pine tree, barking frantically, digging at the snow. Cole swung down from the saddle before the horse had even stopped. "What have you got?" He saw a scrap of dark cloth, then a hand. He moved in 2 strides. Shoving the dog aside, he dropped to his knees. It was a woman. Or a girl. She was half buried, unmoving. Her face was a pale, impossible white, like carved marble. Snowflakes clung to her eyelashes, unmelting. Her lips were a terrible, dark blue. "Ma'am." He put his gloved hand on her shoulder. She was rigid. He pulled his glove off. His fingers, already stiffening in the air, fumbled for her neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing, too cold. He grabbed her wrist. It felt like a piece of frozen wood. He pressed his thumb hard against the delicate skin. Startled, he felt it. Not a beat, a flicker. A thread-thin tremor so faint he thought he had imagined it. But it was there. She was alive. He did not wait. He did not think. He reacted. He stood and ripped the buttons of his heavy canvas coat open. It was lined with thick wool, heavy with the scent of horse and smoke and his own body heat. He shrugged it off. The wind hit his chest like a hammer blow. He knelt again, gently, quickly, turning her. She was light, far too light. He wrapped the heavy coat around her entire body, pulling the collar up over her head, swaddling her like an infant. He pulled her against his chest. He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. He brought his face close to the opening in the coat, his own breath pluming white. He spoke, his voice low and urgent, a promise against the storm. "You're safe now." He turned to his horse. The gelding stood steady. Used to the mountains, it would be faster than the pack horse. He mounted in one smooth motion, settling the bundled girl in front of him, cradled against his chest. He pulled his saddle blanket half free and wrapped it over her, then over his own legs, creating a cocoon. He pressed his body against hers, using his own warmth as a shield against the wind. He turned the horse's head east, toward the ranch. "Juniper, home!" The dog bounded ahead. Cole kicked the horse into a desperate, plunging trot, his arm locked around the frozen girl, his jaw set against the wind. The world was nothing but white noise and the desperate, faint pulse he had felt beneath his thumb. He had to beat the cold. He had to get her to the fire. The first thing she felt was heat. A deep, penetrating, dry heat that was the complete and total opposite of the world she had left. It was a shock. It felt like a violation. Eliza Thorne's eyes snapped open. The world was brown and gold. She was looking at a low ceiling made of rough-hewn pine logs. The gaps chinked with dried mud. The air smelled of wood smoke, curing leather, and something savory, perhaps broth. She was in a bed, not a cot, but a solid, carved wooden bed frame. She was buried under a mountain of heavy wool blankets. She tried to move, to sit up, and a sharp, stinging fire shot up both of her legs. She hissed, falling back against the ticking pillow. She pushed the blankets down. Her lower legs, from the knee down, were wrapped in clean, white bandages. She was alive. The realization was not a comfort. It was a terrifying fact. A sound scraped on the stone hearth nearby. She turned her head, her muscles stiff and aching. He was there, the man from the snow. He was standing by the massive stone fireplace that took up most of the far wall. He was tall, his shoulders broad enough that he seemed to take up all the air in the small, one-room cabin. He was watching her, not with malice, not with interest, but with a quiet, steady assessment. Eliza flinched, trying to pull herself backward, to burrow into the headboard. The blankets tangled around her, trapping her. The man did not move closer. He stayed where he was, a good arm's length from the bed. He held a steaming tin cup in his hand. "You're safe here." His voice was low, a deep resonance that seemed to vibrate in the wooden floor. It was the same voice she had heard in the storm, the words she had mistaken for a fever dream. He set the cup down on a small, three-legged stool near the bed, but he did not step closer. He left the space for her. Willow bark tea for the fever and the pain. Eliza's eyes darted around the room. It was a man's space, but it was not Mason's. It was clean, meticulously, agonizingly clean. Axes were racked by the door. Saddles were hung on pegs. There was no clutter, no filth. On the mantel, above the roaring fire, sat a single, silver-plated photograph, a daguerreotype. It showed a woman with dark hair piled high, her head tilted as she smiled, her hands resting on a mandolin in her lap. The frame was made of dark, carved wood, but one corner was shattered. It had been carefully, painstakingly repaired with a tight wrapping of pale, waxed twine. Eliza stared at the woman, the ghost in the room. The man, Cole Reddick, watched her look at the photo, but his expression did not change. Safe, the word echoed in her head. Mason had used that word when he had taken her from the orphanage, promising her a new life. Mason had been family. This man was a stranger. The warmth was a lie. The cabin was a cage. She had to get out, with a surge of desperate, adrenaline-fueled panic. Eliza threw the heavy blankets off her body. The air in the cabin was warm, but it felt cold against her thin chemise. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards were smooth and cool beneath her bare, uninjured feet. She pushed herself up. The cabin spun violently. Her legs, which had felt fine lying down, turned to water. The blood rushed from her head, leaving a high-pitched ringing in her ears. She grabbed the bedpost, her knuckles white. "You shouldn't be up," the man said, his voice still quiet, but with a new edge of warning. She ignored him. She would not be sold. She would not be trapped. She would rather take the storm. She let go of the bedpost and took one, lurching step toward the door. Then another. She was a newborn foal, her legs shaking, her vision tunneling. She reached the heavy plank door and grabbed the wooden latch. She pulled it. The door swung open. The storm hit her like a solid wall. It was not wind. It was a physical hammer of noise and ice. A deafening white roar that stole her breath and threw her backward. The world she had crawled from was still there, waiting, magnified. The cabin was just a tiny, fragile island in an ocean of violence. She screamed, a thin, dry sound that the wind consumed instantly. She staggered back, her balance gone, and began to fall. Before she could hit the floor, he was there. He had crossed the room in 2 silent strides. He did not reach for her. He moved past her, putting his own body between her and the open door, blocking the gale with his sheer size. He reached back with one arm and pulled the door shut. The world slammed back into silence. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and Eliza's own ragged, panicked breathing. She sagged, all the fight gone, her legs giving out completely. He caught her. His touch was brief, strong, and entirely impersonal. One arm hooked under her knees, the other flat against her back. He did not pull her against his chest. He did not cradle her. He simply lifted her, as one would lift a sack of grain, and carried her the 4 steps back to the bed. He placed her down gently. He pulled the heavy blankets back up to her chin. He did not tuck her in. Then, without a word, he turned his back on her. He walked back to the fireplace, picked up the iron poker, and began to tend the fire. Eliza watched his back. He was giving her his back. He was showing her he was not a threat. She lay there, shaking, caught between the terror of the storm outside and the confusing, terrifying quiet of the man inside. She watched him until the exhaustion, the fever, and the warmth pulled her back under. Night fell. The storm did not lessen. It raged, a living thing trying to claw its way into the cabin. Eliza drifted in a half-sleep, the fever pulling her down into thick, dark water, the pain in her legs pulling her back up. Each time she surfaced, her eyes darted open, convinced Mason had returned, that the railroad foreman was in the room. But each time, she saw only Cole. He had not taken the bed. He had pulled a long, carved wooden chair closer to the hearth, and he sat there, his long legs stretched out. He was not sleeping. He was awake, his gaze fixed on the fire. Every half hour, or perhaps it was an hour, she would hear him move, the soft scrape of a log being added to the fire, the clink of the coffee pot, the muffled sound of him rising to check the latch on the door. His dog, the black shepherd mix named Juniper, was not at his feet. The dog was lying in a tight, watchful coil directly in front of the door. A silent, living lock. He was standing watch. He and his dog were guarding the cabin, and, by extension, they were guarding her. When Eliza woke again, it was to the weak, gray light of morning. The cabin was quiet. The storm had finally, mercifully, broken. She sat up. The fever was lower. Her head felt clearer. She was alone. The man and his dog were gone. A familiar spike of cold panic hit her. He had left her. He had abandoned her, just as Mason had. But the fire was not out. It was banked low. A deep, steady bed of red coals radiating warmth. A pot of water sat on the hook, steaming gently. He had not abandoned her. He had simply gone to work. Her eyes fell on her shoes. Her ruined, pitiful shoes. He had placed them by the hearth to dry. The leather was stiff, the soles cracked. They were useless. She reached for them, her heart sinking. She could not walk in the snow in these, but they felt wrong, heavier. She picked one up. She looked inside. Her breath caught. He had taken a knife and cut the thick, soft shearling liners from a pair of his own winter boots. He had trimmed them, carefully and precisely, and fitted them perfectly inside her old shoes. Eliza sat there, holding the shoe. She stared at the soft, pale fur. He had sacrificed his own warmth for her. He had done it silently, while she slept, and left without waiting for thanks. She touched the lining. It was the first truly soft thing she had felt in a year. A hot, painful stinging pricked at the back of her eyes. She refused to cry. She put the shoes down, her hands shaking. A routine formed, carved out of the silence. She was weak, but she could not be idle. While he was out, she took over the cabin. She washed the bandages he had used and hung them to dry by the fire. She found his small store of dried herbs, yarrow and mint, and sorted them. She refolded the blankets on the bed she had claimed. He never mentioned it. He just worked. She would hear the steady, rhythmic thud of his axe splitting wood, the scrape of his shovel clearing a path to the stable, the distant sound of his hammer, mending a plank on the stable roof. He gave her space. He never entered the cabin while she was moving about. He would wait outside, checking tack or cleaning his rifle, until she was sitting or resting. He never stared. He would glance at her, a quick check, and then look away, giving her the dignity of healing without the pressure of being watched. Every morning, he left before she woke, and every morning, a plate was on the table. A thick slice of fried salt pork and a piece of hardtack, or a piece of venison steak. Beside it, a piece of rough paper. The handwriting was straight, dark, and had no slant. The words were few. Eat, you need strength. On the fourth evening, the silence was different. The storm was gone. The world outside was muffled and still. The cabin was filled with the companionable crackle of the fire. He sat in his chair by the hearth, mending a broken bridle strap. His large hands were surprisingly precise with the needle and awl. Eliza sat on the stool, rubbing salve into the frostbite cracks on her hands. He broke the silence. He did not look up from his work. May. The name landed in the quiet room like a stone dropped in a deep well. Eliza stopped rubbing her hands. He was looking at the daguerreotype on the mantel. The woman with the mandolin. Her name was May Reddick, my fiancée. He spoke to the fire, not to her. His voice was a low, flat monotone. 3 years ago, come spring, there was an avalanche up on the North Ridge. She was visiting her sister in Sweetwater. We were to be married in May. He pulled the thread taut, his knuckles flexing. This cabin, the second room I was building, it was for her, for us. He said nothing more. He had offered his story, a story of a storm and of loss. He had shown her his wound. Eliza looked down at her own hands. She found her voice, a thread of sound, dry and thin. Mason, she whispered. My uncle, my mother's brother. Cole stopped his work. He set the leather strap down. He turned his head and looked at her. He just looked. He was taking me to the railroad camp, she said, the words spilling out now, tasting like ash. There is a foreman there, a man named Ephraim Lowe. He had a contract. She clutched her hands together. Mason said, he said I was worth $50, but he said the storm cut the price. He was angry. He just stopped the wagon. She did not need to tell him the rest. He had found her. When she finished, the silence rushed back in. But it was a different kind. It was not empty. It was shared. Cole held her gaze for a long, long moment. His face was unreadable in the firelight. He did not look angry. He did not look disgusted. He did not offer pity. He just, slowly, nodded. It was a single, heavy movement of his head. An acknowledgement. I hear you. I believe you. You are not worth $50. He picked the bridle back up and threaded the needle, his attention returning to the task. The shared quiet between them was no longer a wall. It was a foundation. The week after the storm, the world was born again in silence and blinding white. The sky was a sharp, aching blue. The only sound was the steady drip, drip, drip of snow melting from the eaves of the cabin. Eliza's legs were healing. The frostbite had left the skin on her shins and feet a mottled, angry red, and the itching was a constant torment. But she could walk. She wore the heavy wool socks Cole had left for her, and her own ruined shoes, now lined with the warmth of his sacrifice. He had been gone since sunrise, checking the cattle in the high pasture. When he returned, he did not go inside. He stood by the door, stamping the snow from his boots. The creek is moving, he said. Eliza looked up from the table, where she was cleaning a handful of beans. Put on my coat, he said, motioning to the heavy shearling he had left hanging by the door, the one he had wrapped her in. The air's still got teeth. She did as she was told, sliding her arms into the massive coat. It fell to her knees, smelling of him of pine smoke, horse and cold iron. She felt small inside it, but for the first time, small did not feel the same as weak. He led her from the cabin. The sunlight on the snow was so bright it made her eyes water. They walked past the stable, down a gentle slope toward a line of skeletal aspen trees. She heard the sound before she saw it, the rush of water, the musical clink and crackle of moving ice. They stood on the bank of Ash Lantern Creek. The water ran fast and dark, but the edges were still cuffed with lacy, intricate shelves of ice. Cole pointed, not at the water, but at a tangle of shrubs on the far bank. They looked dead, their gray branches holding clusters of dried, brittle-looking husks. Witch hazel, he said. His voice was low, carrying easily in the clean, still air. It blooms in the fall, holds its blossoms right through the first snow, looks dead all winter. He gestured at the brittle-looking branches. Anything that holds on through a winter like that, when the world is trying to kill it, it comes back stronger next season. It just waits. Eliza stared at the dry, stubborn blossoms. They had endured. They had not been broken. She reached down, her fingers brushing a similar, snow-covered plant at her feet. She touched the cold, dry husk. She looked up at Cole, at the deep lines around his eyes, and the gray light in them. A strange, unfamiliar muscle pulled at the corner of her mouth. It was not a smile. It was the crack in the ice. The first shift. It was the first expression she had made in his presence that was not born of fear or pain. It was hope. The cabin dynamic shifted. She was no longer an invalid. He was not a jailer. And he was not just a savior. He was a man with a ranch to run, a ranch that was falling apart without a second set of hands. And she, Eliza, could not bear the weight of uselessness. The work became their language. He taught her how to rub tallow into the brittle, frozen leather of the harnesses. She sat by the fire for hours, her hands greasy with the sheep fat, working life back into the stiff straps. The rhythm was a meditation. It was the same motion as rubbing salve onto her own healing skin. She was mending things that had been cracked and abandoned. He taught her how to measure feed. He took her to the small, cold feed room at the back of the stable, the air thick with the sweet smell of oats and dried alfalfa. "This here is the measure," he said, showing her a battered tin can. "One of him for each of the geldings, half for the pack mule. Too much, they'll colic. Too little, they'll starve before the spring grass comes." She nodded, understanding the gravity. It was a lesson in balance, in survival. She took over the cabin. She swept the floor, baked his salt pork, and kept the fire fed. He fixed the stable roof, replaced a split rail in the corral, and spent 2 days digging out the spring house. They moved around each other in a silent, coordinated orbit. He would leave at dawn. She would rise, work, and have broth hot for his return. He would enter, nod to her, and his eyes would scan the clean room, a silent acknowledgement. He never looked at her for long. It was a kind of respect, a granting of privacy that she had never known. He looked away, not because she was unsightly, but so she would not feel the pressure of his gaze. One afternoon, they were in the stable together. He was on a ladder, trying to rehang a heavy tack block. Eliza was filling a hay net. The air was warm with the smell of animals and sweet grass. A sudden violent gust of wind, an echo of the blizzard, tore around the corner of the stable. The heavy wooden door, which Cole had unlatched to work on the hinge, was ripped from his grip. It swung inward like a cannonball, straight toward Eliza. She heard the roar and looked up, frozen. "Eliza!" He did not call her name. He shouted it. He dropped from the ladder, a fall of at least 8 feet, landing in a crouch. He lunged, shoving her hard against the hay bales. She hit the soft alfalfa. The air knocked from her. At the same moment, she heard a sound, a dull thud, and a sharp, metallic rip. Cole had taken her place. He had not been hit by the door, but in shoving her, his own momentum had carried him past it, slamming his shoulder hard against a sharp iron hook set in the wall, used for hanging pulleys. Cole. He was leaning against the stall, his head down, breathing hard. The heavy canvas of his shirt was torn at the shoulder, a dark, wet stain spreading rapidly. "Just grazed," he gritted out, his voice tight with pain. Eliza was on her feet instantly. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. "Sit down." He looked at her, surprised by the command in her voice, but he did as she said, sliding down the wall to sit on a milking stool. She ran to the cabin, grabbed the tin box of medical supplies, the bandages she herself had washed, and a bowl of clean water. When she returned, he was pale, still pressing his hand against the wound. "Let me see," she said. He dropped his hand. The gash was 4 inches long, deep and clean, bleeding freely. She knelt in the straw in front of him. "This will sting." She soaked a cloth in the water and began to clean the wound. He hissed, his muscles tensing, but he did not pull away. She was close, closer than they had ever been. She could feel the heat radiating from his body as she leaned in to see the cut better. Her hair brushed his jaw, and she felt the sharp, hot puff of his breath against her wrist. Her hands did not shake. She packed the wound with yarrow to stop the bleeding and began to wrap the bandage. her movements quick and efficient. She had to loop the bandage under his arm and across his collarbone. Her fingers brushed the warm, solid skin of his chest. He was completely still, watching her. His eyes were not on her hands, but on her face. He watched her expression, the way her brow furrowed in concentration. She finished, tying the knot tight. "It needs stitches, but this will hold it closed for now. You have a steady hand," he said. His voice was quiet. "I had to," she replied, standing up. "My mother was sick for a long time." She gathered the supplies. The air in the stable was thick with a new tension. She had touched him. She had tended to him. The balance had shifted again. That evening, the silence in the cabin was charged. Eliza took the sprig of dry witch hazel she had broken off by the creek. She found an empty glass jar that had once held pickles and filled it with water. She put the branch in the jar and set it on the rough spun cloth in the center of the table. It was a small, defiant act of beauty. Cole sat at the table, his injured arm resting on the wood, watching her. His gaze lingered, not with the pity of a savior, but with the focused respect of an equal. He saw what she was doing. She was not just surviving, she was living. He stood, walked to a large wooden chest at the foot of his bed, and opened it. He took something out, wrapped in oilcloth. He placed it on the table in front of her. "I think this belongs to you now." She unwrapped it. It was a knife. It was not a kitchen tool. It was a weapon, heavy and perfectly balanced. The blade was dark, sharp, and the handle was made of carved, polished bone, yellowed with age. "Every person in this territory needs a tool to protect themselves," he said. "It was my father's." Eliza looked from the knife to his face. This was a trust she could not comprehend. He was giving her the means to harm him. "I don't know how," she whispered. "I'll teach you." He stood behind her. "Pick it up. Hold it like you mean it." She gripped the handle. It felt cold and foreign. "No," he said, his voice close to her ear. "Not like a potato peeler, like you mean to stop a threat." His hand, his right hand, closed over hers. The contact was a shock. It was not like the brief medical touch in the stable. This was deliberate. His hand was large, calloused, and searingly warm. It enveloped her own, adjusting her grip, turning her wrist so the blade was held upright. A jolt went through her, sharp and hot, like a spark from a flint. "There," he said. His hand lingered for a second longer than necessary. "You hold it like that." He stepped back, breaking the contact, leaving the skin on her hand tingling. She needed to break the sudden, thick tension in the room. She needed to do something normal. "You're hungry," she said abruptly. I'll make bread." She found the sack of cornmeal, the lard, and the salt. Her hands, still humming from the feel of the knife and his touch, were clumsy. She mixed the batter too quickly, made the skillet too hot. She poured the batter, the cabin filled with the smell of sizzling corn. And then, very quickly, the acrid smell of smoke. She pulled the skillet off the fire, her heart sinking. She had ruined it. The edges were jet black, the center barely cooked. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice small, her face burning with shame. "I've burnt it." Cole stood, walked over, and looked into the skillet. He was silent for a moment. Then he reached in, broke off a large piece of the blackened, burnt crust, and put it in his mouth. He chewed thoughtfully. Eliza watched, mortified. He swallowed. "A little char," he said, his voice perfectly serious, "is good for the constitution." She stared at him, at the crinkles around his eyes. A bubble of something unfamiliar and painful rose in her chest. A sound tore from her throat, rusty and small. It was a laugh. She had forgotten the sound. He saw her laugh, and the seriousness broke. A slow, deep smile spread across his face, transforming his harsh features. He laughed too, a low, rumbling sound that warmed the entire cabin. The wall of silence, of pain and survival, shattered. Later, the dishes were washed, the fire was banked low. He sat in his chair, she on the stool, the witch hazel branch a silent sentinel on the table between them. She reached into her bodice and pulled out the oilcloth pouch. He had shared his past, she would share hers. She took out the letter, the paper so soft it threatened to disintegrate. "My mother wrote this," she said, her voice quiet. "The day before she died." She unfolded it. Cole leaned forward, his expression intent. She read the words. The ink faded, the script elegant. "My dearest Eliza, the world is harder than I ever told you. Men will try to own you because they fear your light. Do not let them. If you find a good man, a man who is quiet in his strength, trust your heart. It will know." She finished, her voice thick. Cole did not speak. He looked down at his hands, then at the fire. He bowed his head slightly, as if he were in church, as if he were standing before a benediction. The cabin felt too small, too warm. Eliza stood, needing the cold. She walked to the door and stepped out onto the porch. The night was magnificent. The sky was a spray of silver dust. The Big Dipper hung low over the stable, so close she felt she could touch it. She breathed in the sharp, clean air. She heard the door open and close behind her. She did not have to turn. She felt him. He stepped up beside her. He was holding the heavy shearling coat, gently. He draped it over her shoulders. His hands rested on her shoulders for a moment, the weight of them a comfort. He stepped back, but only a single step. He stood at the edge of a safe distance, close enough that she could feel his warmth. She looked up at him. He was looking down at her, and his eyes were not distant. They were not veiled. He was looking at her, at Eliza, and in his gaze, she saw the respect from the cabin, the shared laughter from the burnt bread, and something new, something that made her breath catch. A low whine came from the doorway. Juniper padded out onto the porch. The dog sniffed the cold air, walked over to Eliza, and pushed her head under her hand. Then the dog turned, and with a soft groan, lay down, curling up precisely on top of Eliza's boot-clad feet, claiming her. Cole watched the dog, and his rare smile returned, soft in the starlight. Juniper had made her decision. The pack was no longer just two. It was three. The calm lasted for 2 days. They were days of quiet work, of a new and fragile understanding. The space between Eliza and Cole was no longer empty. It was filled with shared laughter over burnt bread, the weight of the bone-handled knife, and the silent acknowledgement of the dog sleeping at her feet. The cabin had become a sanctuary. Then, on the third morning, the peace was not just broken, it was torn apart. Eliza was by the creek, breaking the thin morning ice to fill a bucket. Cole was in the corral, resetting a post. The air was sharp and still. Juniper was the first to know. She was lying on the porch, a black patch against the snow. Suddenly, she sprang to her feet. Her ruff bristled. A low, vibrating growl started deep in her chest. A sound Eliza had never heard before. It was not the sharp bark for a deer or the high howl for a wolf. This was for a man. "Cole," Eliza called, her voice tight. He had already heard the dog. He was moving from the corral, his long strides eating up the ground. He did not run, but he moved with a terrible, controlled speed. He met her at the cabin door, took the bucket from her frozen hand, and put his body between her and the path. "Go inside," he said. "What is it?" "Do it, Eliza!" Then she heard it, the squeal of an ungreased axle, the snort of a tired horse, the crunch of wheels on the snow-packed track. A wagon, the same dilapidated, skeletal wagon, crested the low ridge. The blood drained from Eliza's face. The cold she felt was not from the air. It was from memory. It was the absolute, hollow cold of the wagon bed. She backed into the doorframe, her hand gripping the wood so hard a splinter drove into her palm. Mason Pike pulled the horse to a halt. He was still wearing the same filthy coat. He looked drunk, his face puffy and red from the cold. He grinned, a broken-toothed expression of triumph. "Well now," he slurred, climbing down. "Found yourself a warm nest, did you? Girl told you was valuable." But he was not alone. A second man dismounted from a fine-looking sorrel mare that was tied to the wagon's back. This man was the opposite of Mason. He was clean-shaven, his face sharp and intelligent. He wore a dark wool town coat, and his boots were polished. His eyes, the color of filed steel, swept over the cabin, the stable, and Cole, calculating the value of every log. "Cole Reddick," the new man said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the air. "Ephraim Lowe, Montana and North Spur Railroad." Cole did not move. He stood on the porch, a solid, unmovable presence. "You're trespassing, Mr. Lowe." "I'm here on business," Lowe said, stepping forward. Mason, emboldened, moved up beside him. "We're here to collect our property." "She is not property," Cole said. His voice was dangerously quiet. Mason laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "She's my kin, my blood. She does as I say. I'm taking her. I got a new deal, a man in Cheyenne, offering gold." "You threw her in a snowdrift, Pike," Cole said. "You left her to die. You forfeited any claim you ever had." "Did I?" Mason's eyes narrowed, crafty and mean. "I don't recall that. I recall you having a debt. I recall you coming to me 2 summers back, when the drought near killed your herd, begging for hay. I recall signing a note for $50, seed and feed, that you ain't never paid." Eliza saw Cole's shoulders tense. It was true. The debt was real. "You pay me what you owe, Reddick," Mason sneered. "Or I take my niece. Your choice." "That's not how debt works in this territory, Pike," Cole said. "It is when I'm holding the paper," Mason said, patting his coat pocket. "He's right, Mr. Reddick." Ephraim Lowe interjected smoothly, "A debt is a debt, but we're not unreasonable men. The girl is, as your friend says, contracted." "She is contracted to no one," Eliza said. The words came out, thin but sharp, from the doorway. All 3 men turned to look at her. Lowe smiled, a thin, cold expression. "But she is, Miss Thorne. You see, your uncle, as your guardian, signed an agreement, an advance on wages, for your passage and board." "I never signed anything," Eliza said, stepping out onto the porch, her terror mixing with a new, hot rage. "Your signature wasn't required." Lois said, "Only your uncle's. But as it happens..." He reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. "You did?" He held it out. It was a formal-looking document, with the railroad's letterhead, and at the bottom, a messy, looping signature, Eliza Thorne. Beside it, a heavy, intricate wax seal. "That is a lie," Eliza whispered, staring at the forgery. "That is not my name. It's a mark," Lowe said, shrugging. "Close enough for the law. Not for the law in Hickory Bluff," a new voice said, sharp and clear. A third rider was coming up the track, a person on a tall bay, moving fast. The rider pulled up, and Eliza saw the glint of a tin star on a heavy wool coat. The rider swung down. It was a woman. She was tall, in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore men's trousers and a gun belt that sat comfortably on her hips. "Sheriff Ada McCaffrey," she said, her eyes taking in everyone. "Mr. Lowe, Pike, you're a long way from the saloon." "Sheriff," Lowe said, tipping his hat, his smooth demeanor not slipping. "Just settling a business matter." "Looks like more than that," Ada said. She looked past the men, at Eliza. "Ma'am, are you here of your own free will?" Eliza met the woman's gaze. It was a hard gaze, but it was fair. "I am." "Is this man?" She pointed to Mason. "Your legal guardian?" "No," Eliza said. "My parents are gone. He is my uncle." "And you're 19 years of age," Ada stated. "Yes, ma'am." Ada turned back to Mason. "Then she is a free person. She is not chattel. You have no claim. The Wyoming Territory statute is clear. No contract, no marriage, no bond. You will leave." "She is under contract," Ephraim Lowe said, holding up the paper. "To my railroad. An advance of $30. She signed it." Ada took the paper. She studied it. She looked at the seal. then at Eliza, then at Lowe. "Miss Thorne," Ada said, "did you sign this?" "No, Sheriff, I did not. I have never seen that paper before." "A clear dispute," Ada said. She looked at Cole. "Mr. Reddick." Cole stepped forward, his eyes locked on the wax seal. "Sheriff, that seal is fresh. The wax hasn't even fully hardened, and I'll wager the ink is still damp." He looked at Lowe. "Where did you get that seal, Mr. Lowe?" Lowe's eyes tightened. "It's the company seal." "Is it?" Cole asked. "Or is it one you had made?" Ada McCaffrey folded the paper. "Mr. Lowe, this document is now in legal dispute. Its validity is in question. I am therefore placing a 7-day suspension on this claim." "7 days," Mason exploded. "7 days," Ada repeated, her voice like iron. "During which time Miss Thorne will remain in the county, under Mr. Reddick's protection, and you, Mr. Lowe, will provide me with the provenance of this document. Pike, your debt claim against Mr. Reddick is a separate civil matter. You try to collect it by force or threat, and I'll have you in the drunk tank for a month. Now, both of you, get off this property." Ephraim Lowe stared at Ada, a cold fire in his eyes. He had been beaten, for now. He gave a sharp, formal nod. "Sheriff, Mr. Reddick!" He turned and mounted his horse. Mason lingered, his face purple with rage. "This ain't over, girl," he spat at Eliza. "Or you, Reddick, you still owe me. Go!" Ada said, her hand resting on the butt of her pistol. Mason scrambled back onto his wagon and whipped his horse, turning the wagon so fast it nearly tipped. Lowe and Pike rode back down the track, 2 specks of darkness against the snow. Eliza did not realize she was shaking until Cole put a hand on her elbow. "It's done." "You're safe." But she wasn't. The cabin was no longer a fortress. The world had found her. That night, the nightmares came back. She was in the snow. She was sinking. Mason was laughing. Lowe was holding the paper. But the paper was on fire, and he was trying to press the hot, melting wax seal onto her skin. She woke up with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in the bed. Her chemise was plastered to her skin with cold sweat. The cabin was dark, lit only by the low, red glow of the embers in the fireplace. "You're all right." Cole's voice. He was sitting in his chair, a dark silhouette against the red glow. He had not gone to bed. He was standing watch. "He's coming back," Eliza whispered, pulling the blankets up to her chin. "He'll get in. The door." "He won't get through the door," Cole said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Juniper is there. I am here." He stood, not to come to her, but to walk to the wall. He touched the door. "And if he does, this is not the wagon. Eliza." He moved to the small, square window. "Here is a door." He pointed to the heavy trap door that led to the root cellar. "Here is another." He turned to face her, a tall, solid shadow. "Here, you choose every door. You are not trapped. Not ever again." She let out a breath she had been holding since morning. He was right. She was not the same girl. She had been cold, and she had been found. The next morning, Sheriff McCaffrey returned. She left her horse at the gate and knocked. "Miss Thorne," she said, accepting a cup of coffee. "Mr. Lowe is a dangerous man. The railroad is pushing the spur line through at a record pace. They need cooks, laundresses, and other comforts for the men. They pay men like Lowe a high price for every contracted woman they deliver. He means to take her." Cole said, "It was not a question. He means to try." Ada replied, "Which is why I brought this." She unstrapped a long, cloth-wrapped object from her saddle. She brought it inside and laid it on the table, unwrapping the oilcloth. It was a shotgun, a short-barreled shotgun, its stock worn smooth. "It's a scattergun," Ada said, breaking it open to show Eliza it was unloaded. "You don't have to be a marksman. You just have to point. I'm leaving it with you. Cole has his rifles. But this is for the cabin. This is for close work." She looked at Eliza, her eyes kind but firm. "I hope you never have to touch it, but if they cross that threshold, you use it. You only use it if you are forced to." Eliza looked at the gun. It was heavy, oiled, and deadly. She nodded, her throat dry. When Ada left, Eliza picked it up. She felt its weight. She practiced lifting it, pointing it at the door, her fingers learning the feel of the cold trigger guard. She practiced breathing, just as Cole had taught her with the knife. Inhale, hold, exhale. Cole watched her. She's right. You only use it as the last resort. I know, Eliza said, setting it down. I need to know about the seal. Cole nodded, his mind already on the same track. Ada kept the original, but I saw it. I know the man who made it. They rode to Hickory Bluff, both armed. The town was small, just a single muddy street, but it was busy. They did not go to the sheriff's office. Cole led Eliza to the forge. The sound of a hammer on an anvil rang out, a sharp, clean rhythm. Inside, a mountain of a man. His face perpetually streaked with soot, was shaping a glowing red horseshoe. This was Owen Kell. Cole! The blacksmith boomed, plunging the shoe into a trough. Steam exploded. What brings you and who is this? Owen, this is Eliza Thorne. We need your eye and your discretion. You've always got both, Owen said, wiping his massive hands on his leather apron. Cole described the wax seal, the intricate MNS lettering, the railroad spike motif, the slightly off-center milling. Owen nodded, listening. I know the stamp. I made it. Eliza's heart sank. But, Owen said, holding up a finger, I didn't make the one you saw. I made the original for Mr. Lowe 3 months ago. He said it was for marking company property, but the one I made was perfect. The lettering was balanced. The one on the paper was flawed. Cole said, the S was lower than the N. A forgery, Owen said, a slow grin spreading. A bad one, and I'll tell you who made it. He led them to the back of his shop, where he kept a small, clunky printing press. He pointed. This is a Dry Bluff Depot press. I use it for posters, sale bills, to clean the type. I use a special compound, red sand, from the depot itself. It's finer than river sand. It gets into the cracks. He picked up a magnifying glass from his bench. A man came in here 2 days ago. Said he was from the depot. Silas Merritt, the station master. Said he needed to make an emergency seal for a lost company stamp. I was busy. I let him use the press. Owen handed the loop to Cole. Look at my tray. See the residue? Cole looked, and in the corners of the letter tray, mixed with black ink, were tiny, unmistakable specks of red sand. If Merritt made that stamp 2 days ago, Cole said, that sand is embedded in the wax he used. He was in a hurry. He wouldn't have cleaned it properly. Silas Merritt, Eliza whispered. He's part of it. He's the link, Cole said, his eyes bright with a cold, hard light. Lowe and Mason think they have 7 days. They're wrong. They stood in the warmth of the forge, the 3 of them, the blacksmith, the rancher, and the survivor. We go to the depot tomorrow, Cole said, looking at Eliza. Ada will meet us. We confront Merritt. We end this, not with a shotgun, with the truth. Hickory Bluff was not a quiet town. It was the end of the line for a dozen cattle trails and the start of the new railroad spur. The single, wide Main Street, a river of thawing mud, was choked with freight wagons, horsemen, and prospectors. The air was a cacophony, a tinny, out-of-tune piano struggling through a reel from the open door of the Golden Nugget Saloon. The steady, rhythmic clang-clang-clang of Owen Kell's hammer from the forge. Men shouting, laughing, and spitting brown streams of tobacco juice onto the boardwalk. For Eliza, after weeks of the profound, snow-blanketed silence of Red Willow Ranch, the town was a physical assault. She walked close to Cole, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, her shoulders drawn in, half hidden in the folds of his massive shearling coat. He was a solid, warm presence beside her, his gaze sweeping the street, moving through the chaos as if it were water and he were a stone. Sheriff Ada McCaffrey walked on Eliza's other side, her boots making decisive, solid sounds on the planks. As they passed the general store, a man in an apron, the storekeep, nodded to the sheriff. Morning, Ada. Mr. Reddick, ma'am. Mr. Price. Ada nodded, her voice crisp and formal. She gestured to Eliza. This is Miss Eliza Thorne. She is a formal complainant in a coercion and forgery case. The storekeep's expression shifted from simple curiosity to a deep, frontier respect. Miss Thorne, he said, touching the brim of his hat. Eliza, startled, nodded back. Complainant. The word settled on her. It was not victim. It was not property. It was a word with weight. A word with a spine. She felt Cole's arm tense beside her. A silent signal of approval. And she straightened her back. Just a fraction. Their destination was at the far end of the street, the Dry Bluff Depot. It was a small, neat building of new-cut lumber, smelling strongly of coal smoke and the sharp, metallic tang of the telegraph key, which was clicking rapidly from an inner office. A small, thin man with a green visor and ink-stained sleeve garters was behind the counter. Silas Merritt. He looked up, his expression of mild annoyance fading to one of pure, distilled fear when he saw Sheriff McCaffrey. Sheriff, he stammered, his hands fluttering to the ledger on his desk. Is there a problem with the mail dispatch? No, Silas, Ada said, her voice deceptively calm. She, Cole, and Eliza lined up in front of the counter, a silent, imposing wall. We're here about a document, a labor contract? A contract. Silas licked his lips. I don't handle railroad labor contracts. That's Mr. Lowe's business. This one was special, Ada said. It had a freshly made seal and a forged signature. We believe you made it. That is a lie, Silas yelped, backing away from the counter. I am a station master. I am a man of position. Eliza had been silent, her eyes scanning the room, the inkwells, the stacks of paper. Her gaze fell on the large, open ledger on Silas's desk, the one he had been writing in. He had just finished an entry. Received 2 crates, dry goods. The way he wrote his T, the way his S looped slightly, falling below the line. It was him, Eliza said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. All 3 turned to her. What did you say, ma'am? Ada asked. Eliza pointed at the ledger. His handwriting, that S, the way he writes his name, it's the same. It's the same hand that signed Eliza Thorne on the paper, mister. Lowe had... Silas Merritt's face went white. He made a move to slam the ledger shut, a frantic, guilty motion. Don't you touch it, Silas, Ada commanded. But he had already moved. He had grabbed the book, and as he did, his cuff brushed against the page, smudging the fresh ink. He tried to hide his hand, but Ada was too fast. She leaned over the counter and grabbed his wrist. What's this? On the side of Silas's right hand, and on the edge of his white shirt cuff, was a distinct, dark smudge. It was not the standard black ink of the ledger. It was a deep, rich, royal blue, the exact, unusual color of the forged signature on the contract. I spilled a bottle, Silas stammered, trying to pull his hand free. You're a liar, Cole said, his voice a low growl. You were practicing, or you were writing something else you didn't want seen. Ada released his wrist and pointed to the drawers beneath the counter. Open them, all of them. That's private company property. Open them, Silas, or I'll have Owen Kell down here with a pry bar, and he'll send you the bill for a new desk. Trembling, Silas fumbled with a set of keys. He opened the top drawer manifests. Paper, pens, the second telegraph forms. He skipped the bottom, largest drawer. That one, Cole said, pointing. It's just personal. Silas whispered. Ada drew her pistol. She did not point it at him. She just held it, low, at her side. Open the drawer. Silas! His hands were shaking so badly he could barely fit the key in the lock. He turned it. The drawer clicked open. Ada pulled it open. Inside, it was all there. A small, carved block of hardened lead. The imperfect, flawed MNS seal clearly visible. A half-empty bottle of deep blue ink. And a small, thin, leather-bound book. Ada picked up the book. It was a payment ledger. She opened it to the most recent page. Her eyes scanned the neat, blue-inked lines. Well, she said. To Mason Pike, for procurement services. Advance, $10 gold. To Ephraim Lowe, for contract acquisition, $20 gold. She looked up, her eyes like ice. It seems, Mr. Merritt, you are not just a forger, you're a bookkeeper for a slavery ring. The public meeting room in the town hall was packed. It was not a formal trial, just a hearing, but the entire town had turned out. Ranchers, storekeeps, and Owen Kell stood at the back. Ephraim Lowe was there, flanked by 3 hard-faced men from his railroad crew. Mason Pike was there too, sitting in a corner, already smelling of whiskey, his eyes darting nervously. Ada, Cole, and Eliza stood at the front. Eliza felt the eyes of the entire town on her. Ada was magnificent. She laid out the evidence with the precision of a carpenter. The forged contract, the matching blue ink, the flawed lead seal, the payment ledger. Silas Merritt, she explained, was already in the county holding cell, having confessed everything. Ephraim Lowe, Ada said, her voice ringing in the silent hall. You stand accused of conspiracy, forgery, and a violation of the territorial statute on forced labor. She held up the thick statute book. For the education of those present, the law states, any attempt to compel, coerce, or transport an individual into forced labor, or to hold them to a contract signed under false pretenses or duress, shall be met with the full and immediate forfeiture of all property, assets, and active contracts related to the offense. A collective gasp went through the room. This was not just jail. This was ruin. The railroad men went rigid. Lowe's polished mask of civility shattered. This is a preposterous fabrication, he shouted, leaping to his feet. I am a victim in this. I was misled by this drunken fool. He pointed a shaking finger at Mason. He came to me. He offered his niece. He assured me she was a willing party, that he was her legal guardian. He produced a debt note against Mr. Reddick. It was his greed, his scheme. Mason Pike jumped up, his face purple. You're a liar. It was your idea from the start. You saw her in town last month. You said you had to have her for the foreman's camp. You told me to name my price. You promised to clear my debt with Reddick. You're a drunk and a fool, Lowe spat. You're a slaver, Mason roared back. Mason, in his rage, lunged forward, his hands clawed, as if to grab Eliza, the source of all his problems. You stupid girl, He never finished the sentence. Cole moved. He had been standing just behind Eliza's shoulder, a silent shadow. In one fluid, economical motion, he stepped directly in front of her. He did not touch Mason. He did not draw a weapon. He simply became a wall, a 6'3" wall of mountain, muscle, an absolute, cold fury. Mason Pike stopped dead, as if he had run into a granite cliff. He looked up into Cole's face, and all the fight, all the alcoholic rage, drained out of him. He visibly shrank. Sit down, Pike, Cole said, and his voice was so low, so final, that Mason stumbled backward and fell back into his chair. The room was dead silent. The main doors of the hall banged open. Owen Kell, the blacksmith, strode in, his face grim, his apron still on. He was carrying a heavy, flat plate of lead and a newly inked piece of paper. Sheriff, he boomed, his voice filling the hall. Pardon my delay. The press was cold, and I had to heat the lead to get a clean pull. He held up the piece of paper. This, gentlemen, is a proof. I pressed it myself, not 30 minutes ago, from the lead mold found in Silas Merritt's desk. He then held up the original forged contract. And this is the contract in question. He laid them side by side on Ada's table. For all to see, the seal is identical. The flawed S is a perfect match. And, he added, pulling a small cloth from his pocket, I scraped this from the mold before I heated it. Red sand? From my own press-cleaning tray. He turned and pointed one massive, soot-stained finger at Ephraim Lowe. A seal, Mr. Lowe. That was made yesterday, in my shop. By your man, Silas, not 3 months ago in a Cheyenne office. The noose was tight. The trap was sprung. Ephraim Lowe, Ada McCaffrey said, "You are hereby detained on behalf of the county. Your personal assets, and all railroad assets under your direct control, are frozen, pending a hearing by the circuit judge." As Ada and her deputy moved forward to cuff the stunned railroad man, Mason Pike saw his chance. All eyes were on Lowe. The back door was unguarded. He bolted. He shoved a rancher aside and scrambled out the back door into the alley. He did not run clear. He stopped at the mouth of the alley, his face a mask of pure, desperate hatred. He screamed, not at Ada, but at Cole and Eliza, who were watching from the doorway. "This is not over. Reddick, you hear me? You think you won? If I can't have what I'm owed, I'll see it burn. I'll burn that precious ranch of yours to the frozen ground. I'll burn you both in it." He vanished down the alley. Ada finished cuffing Luva and handed him to her deputy. "Get him in the cell with Merritt." "Post a guard." She turned to Cole, her face hard. "I've got to get this evidence and Lowe to the county seat in Cheyenne. The circuit judge is there. I can't let this fall apart." Cole nodded, his gaze fixed on the empty alley. He knew Mason. He knew the man was a coward, but he was also a drunk. And a drunk with nothing left to lose was as dangerous as a cornered animal. The threat was real. "I'm taking Eliza back to Red Willow," Cole said, his voice grim. "He'll come tonight," Ada said. It was not a question. "I know. Be safe. Cole, lock it down." "We will," he said. He turned to Eliza, his hand finding her elbow, his touch grounding her. "Let's go. We have to prepare for the night." The ride back from Hickory Bluff was silent, charged with a dread that was heavier than the coming storm. The sky had turned a sickly, bruised color, a deep gray-green that promised more than snow. It promised violence. The air was dead still, and Eliza could smell the sharp, metallic tang of ozone, the scent of lightning trapped in the clouds. They did not rest. They did not eat. They prepared for a siege. Cole moved with a grim, focused economy. He loaded his Winchester, checking the action, and laid it on the mantel. He loaded the short-barreled shotgun Ada had left, placing it by the cabin's single window. Eliza, following his lead, found the bone-handled knife and slipped it into the waistband of her skirt, the handle pressing cold against her skin. "The cabin is solid," Cole said, his voice a low rumble as he barred the heavy plank door. "He can't burn us out of here easily. The logs are green. It's the stable he'll go for, the hay." The hay was their life. It was their winter. It was the future of the ranch. To lose the hay was to lose everything. "We fill every bucket," he commanded. They worked as a team, a silent, efficient machine. They drew water from the creek, their hands aching from the cold, filling the 2 large barrels just inside the stable door. They filled every bucket, every pot, every trough, lining them up along the stable's north wall. Night fell. It did not creep in. It crashed down. A sudden, suffocating darkness. The wind began to pick up, whining around the corners of the cabin. But it was a strange wind, blowing from the west, warm and erratic. Cole lit a single lantern, the light casting huge, flickering shadows. Eliza sat on the stool, the shotgun across her lap, her knuckles white. Cole stood by the window, a rifle in his hand, a silhouette against the dark glass. Watching the tree line, they waited. The only sound was the rising shriek of the wind and the soft, steady crackle of the fire. Juniper, who had been lying by the hearth, let out a sound. It was not a growl. It was a low, vibrating woof, a sound of deep, profound agitation. She rose to her feet, the fur on her back standing up like a wire brush. "He's here," Cole whispered. He moved to the door, cracked it open a bare inch, and peered into the darkness. Eliza joined him, her heart hammering so hard it felt like a fist against her ribs. At first, she saw nothing, just the swirling, wind-blown snow. Then, she saw them, not one, but three flickering, dancing lights, like fireflies, bobbing in the darkness near the edge of the woods. Torches, Juniper let out a low, savage bark. "They're not coming for the cabin," Cole said, his voice grim. "They're circling. They're going for the hay barn." He unbarred the door. "Eliza, grab 2 buckets. I'll get the plow." "The plow? He wants to use the wind to burn us out," Cole said, his eyes blazing with a cold, tactical fire. "The wind is from the west. It'll push the fire right from the barn to the cabin. We're going to fight it upstream. We're going to make a fire break." He burst from the cabin. Grabbing a heavy canvas tarp from the porch, Eliza snatched 2 full buckets, the water sloshing, and ran after him. Juniper ran at Cole's heels, barking, a black shadow against the snow. The night was chaotic. The 3 torches were closer now, moving along the perimeter of the hay barn. Eliza could smell it now, sharp and sickening kerosene. "They're soaking the foundation." Cole yelled over the wind. "We don't have time." He ran to the small walking plow they kept near the corral. He put his full weight into it, his muscles straining, and drove the blade deep into the wet, half-frozen earth between the cabin and the stable. He began to carve a long, deep furrow, turning the wet, dark soil over the snow, creating a barrier of mud and damp earth that the fire would struggle to cross. "Eliza, the north wall, keep it wet." Eliza ran, the buckets heavy, her arms screaming. She threw the water high against the dry wooden planks of the stable, the water freezing almost instantly, creating a thin, glistening shield of ice. She saw them clearly now. Mason, his face lit by the torch he held, his expression one of twisted glee. With him were 2 other men, rough-looking, hired from the saloon. "Light it up," Mason roared. He drew his arm back and threw his torch. It arced through the air, a comet of burning pitch, landing directly on the dry, tinder-like hay that was piled against the stable door. The hay whooshed into flame, a sudden, terrifying explosion of light and heat. Cole was still 50 yards away, fighting the plow. He couldn't get there. Eliza acted. She didn't think. She dropped her empty buckets and grabbed the heavy, water-soaked canvas tarp Cole had dropped. It was immensely heavy. She lifted it, her back screaming in protest, and ran straight at the new fire. She swung the tarp, a single, desperate, all-encompassing motion. She smothered the flames. There was a loud, wet hiss. The fire, starved of air, died, leaving a cloud of acrid, choking smoke. "You witch!" Mason screamed. Eliza turned to run back for more water. She slipped. Her feet went out from under her on a patch of ice. She fell backward, her arms flailing. She never hit the ground. Cole was there. He had abandoned the plow. He caught her, his left arm wrapping around her waist like a band of steel, yanking her upright. Her momentum slammed him backward, and his shoulder, the one she had bandaged, crashed hard into the solid oak post of the corral. A sharp, agonizing crack echoed in the night. Cole grunted in pain, his face going white, but he did not let her go. He shoved her behind him. "Get back to the house. Your arm. Now, Eliza." But it was too late. The other 2 men had lit their torches. They were running toward the kerosene cans. And then the wind, the erratic, violent wind, changed. It had been blowing from the west. In a single, violent gust, it died, paused, and then shrieked back from the north, a blast of pure, Arctic cold. The fire that Mason's men had been nurturing, the flames that had been licking at the stable, were suddenly blown backward. A sheet of flame washed over the men, back toward the kerosene they had just splashed. One of the men screamed. He was holding a lit lantern. In his panic, he threw it. He did not throw it at the barn. He threw it at the open 5-gallon can of kerosene. The world ended. A white-hot flash turned the night to day, a deafening phoom that felt like a punch in the chest. The kerosene can exploded, sending a plume of fire 50 feet into the air. One of Mason's men was caught in the center of it. His coat, soaked in the oil, ignited instantly. He became a living torch, a screaming, flailing figure of pure, orange light. The other man, splattered with burning oil, dropped his torch and ran, clawing at his face, running blind into the darkness. "Down!" Cole yelled, tackling Eliza to the ground. covering her body with his own as burning debris rained down. For a moment, there was only the sound of the man screaming and the roar of the new, uncontrolled fire. "Drop and roll, you fool!" Cole bellowed. But the man was beyond reason. Then, from the darkness, figures emerged. "Get him! Get him in the snow!" It was Ada McCaffrey's voice. She was not in Cheyenne. She was here, with 2 deputies. They tackled the man who was on fire, pulling him to the ground, beating out the flames on his back with their coats. One of the deputies, a large man, chased down the second crony and brought him to the ground with a flying tackle. The night was suddenly full of light, shouts, and the smell of burnt wool and flesh. Mason Pike stood alone, frozen, the burning wreck of his plan surrounding him. He looked at the screaming, injured man on the ground. He looked at Ada McCaffrey, who was now walking toward him, her pistol drawn. He looked at Cole, who was helping Eliza to her feet. He was trapped, so he ran. He did not run toward the road. He ran toward the back of the ranch, toward the low, marshy ground that fed Ash Lantern Creek. He ran toward the frozen swamp. "He's getting away!" the deputy yelled. Ada did not hesitate. "You, stay with the prisoners, Callan, with me!" But Eliza was already moving. She was not thinking about Ada or Cole. She was watching the shadow of Mason Pike disappear. This was not about the law. This was not about the ranch. This was about the wagon. This was about the snowdrift. She sprinted past Ada, her feet light in the fleece-lined boots. "Eliza, no, it's not safe," Cole yelled, his voice tight with pain from his shoulder. She didn't listen. She ran, her lungs burning. Not from the cold, but from the rage. She was fast. She was fueled by weeks of fear and a lifetime of pain. She reached the edge of the swamp. It was a wide, flat expanse of frozen reeds and dark, uneven ice. Mason was already 100 feet out, scrambling, falling, and getting up again. Eliza did not hesitate. She ran onto the ice. She heard a sound like a pistol shot. Crack. The ice under Mason's feet. It was not solid. The swamp, fed by underground springs, never froze all the way through. He screamed, a high, thin sound, as his leg broke through. He was trapped, waist deep, in the black, freezing mud and water. He clawed at the ice, but it kept breaking under his weight. Eliza stopped. She was 10 feet away, an arm's length. She could hear him gasping, the sound of his teeth chattering. "Help me," he whimpered. "Please, Eliza, I'm your family. Help me." She walked forward, slowly, testing the ice. She stopped just out of his reach. She looked down at him, at this pathetic, whimpering, terrified man. He was the monster who had thrown her away. He was the ghost that had haunted her sleep. He was the reason she had to learn to hold a knife. The bone-handled knife was in her hand. She did not remember drawing it. He saw it. His eyes went wide. "No, please, Eliza, no, I'll give you the $50, She looked at the knife, gleaming in the light of the distant fire. She looked at his face, a mask of pure terror. She could end it. One quick motion. He would sink into the black water, and he would be gone. The cold would take him, just as it had almost taken her. She remembered the feeling, the numbness, the suffocation, the utter desolate loneliness of being left to die. And she made her choice. She did not kill him. She did not save him. She sheathed the knife. She looked around and saw a long, heavy wooden pole, part of an old fence, lying on the bank. She walked back, her feet solid on the ice, picked it up, and returned to him. She held it out, extending it, but keeping the end just at her feet. He would have to pull himself. She would not pull him. He stared at the pole, then at her face. "I am not like you," Eliza Thorne said. Her voice was not a whisper. It was flat, hard, and final. He sobbed, a sound of broken relief, and grabbed the pole, hauling his freezing, mud-caked body out of the water. He crawled onto the solid ice at her feet, a soaked, shivering wreck. Ada and her deputy arrived, their lanterns cutting through the dark. They saw Mason, defeated, at Eliza's feet. They saw Eliza, standing over him, not with a weapon, but with the pole she had used to give him a choice. Ada did not say a word. She walked past Eliza, pulled Mason to his feet, and slammed the iron cuffs onto his wrists. The deputy, Callan, stared at Eliza, at the quiet, terrible strength radiating from her. He slowly, respectfully, bowed his head. As dawn broke, a cold, miserable sleet began to fall. It hissed on the last of the embers, turning the night's destruction into a field of black, wet ash. The hay barn was standing. It was scorched. The main door was gone, and a corner of the roof was burned through, but it was standing. The firebreak had held. Eliza was wrapped in a blanket by the cabin door. Ada had taken Mason and his men away. Cole walked out of the stable, his face grim, streaked with soot. He had splinted his arm against his chest. It was broken. He stopped in front of her. The sleet was turning to wet snow, dusting their hair with white. They were both exhausted, bruised, and covered in smoke and mud. They just looked at each other. There were no words. There was only the white steam of their breath, mingling in the cold morning air. Cole raised his good hand, not to touch her face, but to gently brush a speck of ash from her cheek. His eyes, when they met hers, were not dark with pain. They were bright. They were blazing with a shared, fierce, and unspoken understanding. They had fought a fire. They had faced a ghost. And they had, together, survived. The fire in the hearth was the only thing in the world that was not exhausted. It crackled, a bright, steady, amber-colored heart in the center of the cabin. Outside, the brief, violent sleet storm had passed, leaving behind a profound silence, a world washed clean and frozen. They were a ruin. Cole sat in his chair, his left arm bound in a tight, splinted sling against his chest, his face pale and tight with pain beneath a mask of soot. Eliza sat on the stool opposite him. She was trembling, the adrenaline of the fight, of the chase, of the choice at the swamp, finally draining away, leaving a deep, aching cold. Juniper lay between them, her head on her paws, twitching and whining in her sleep, her legs running as she chased Mason's ghosts. Eliza stood. Her movements were stiff. She went to the stove, poured warm water from the kettle into a bowl, and found a clean rag. She walked back to him. He watched her, his one good eye, the one not swollen from the fight, following her. She knelt in front of him, on the hearth. She dipped the rag, wrung it out, and lifted her hand to his face. She was so close she could see the gray flecks in his dark eyes, the fine lines of exhaustion etched around his mouth. She touched the rag to his temple, gently wiping away the mixture of soot and sweat. He did not flinch. He did not move. He just watched her. Her hand began to shake. It was not from cold. It was the aftershock, the memory of the ice, the knife, the look in Mason's eyes, the sheer, terrifying weight of her decision. "I could have," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "I could have let him die." The rag trembled in her fingers. Cole raised his right hand, his good hand. He did not grab her. He did not stop her. He simply, gently, laid his hand over her wrist. His palm was warm, calloused, and immensely steady. The trembling in her hand stopped, absorbed by his strength. "But you didn't," he said. His voice was a low, rough rumble. She finished cleaning his face, her hand now held steady by his. The silence in the cabin stretched, filled only by the hiss and pop of the burning logs. "Your arm," she said, her voice still a whisper. "The post. It will mend," he said. He looked at the splint she had made, then at her. "The barn is standing. The hay is safe. You saved it. Eliza, that tarp." "We saved it," she corrected him. She drew her hand back, and he let her go. She sat back on the stool. "Mason," Cole said, staring into the fire. "The debt he held over me, it's gone. With his arrest, the note is void. It's over." Eliza looked at her own hands, still red from the cold and the buckets. "There are no more debts," she said. Not for you, not for me. She looked up at him. I am not in your debt. Cole, I want you to know that what I did tonight, it was not to pay you back for the snow. He finished. He shook his head. A small, pained movement. I never thought of it as a debt. I know, she said. But I had to. He looked at her, his gaze so intense it was a physical touch. You chose, he said. You chose to face him. You chose to save him. You chose to throw that tarp. I've never seen anything like it. He stood, slowly, his good hand pushing him up from the chair. He walked to the peg by the door. Hanging there was the coat, the original coat, the heavy, shearling-lined canvas, still smelling of him, of smoke, of that first night. It was the coat that had saved her life. It was the cocoon from which she had emerged. He took it down, a clumsy movement with his one good arm. He turned back to her. He didn't speak. He just held it open. Eliza stood. She walked to him, stepping into the circle of his arm. He draped the coat over her shoulders. It was a familiar weight, a known comfort. But this time, it was not a rescue. It was a coronation. It has been our third arm, he murmured, his voice rough, his face close to her hair. She was standing inside his guard, wrapped in his warmth. He was so close. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her ear. He did not pull her closer. He did not kiss her. He just stood, offering her shelter, waiting. He had given her every choice. The door, the window, the gun, the knife. He had let her face Mason. He had let her walk onto the ice. Now, she made the final choice. Slowly, she relaxed the last rigid line of defense in her spine. She let go. She leaned her head forward, just that small distance, and rested her cheek against the solid, warm wall of his chest, just above his collarbone. It was a question. It was a surrender. It was the quietest, loudest thing she had ever done. She felt his entire body go still. She felt the sharp intake of his breath. A long, long moment passed. Then, she felt his chin come down, resting gently on the top of her head. He nodded, a single, slow, consenting motion. His good arm, his right arm, came around her, pulling her flush against him. He held her, his hands spread wide against her back, holding her as if she were the last solid thing on earth. She breathed him in, the smell of wood smoke and soap and the faint, metallic tang of his blood from the fight. He just held her, after a long time. She tilted her head back. She looked up at him. His eyes were dark, and the calculated distance was gone. He was not the rancher. He was not the savior. He was just Cole, and he was looking at her with a raw, unguarded hunger that was so profound it made her knees weak. But it was not the hunger of Ephraim Lowe. It was not the greed of Mason. It was a hunger to be seen. He lowered his head. The kiss was not a crash. It was not a fire. It was a landing. It was slow. It was deep. It was warm. His lips, chapped from the cold and the fight, brushed hers. A hesitant question. She answered by rising slightly on her toes. A small, affirmative pressure. It was a kiss of profound relief. It tasted of smoke and winter and the faintest, salty trace of the tears she had not realized she was shedding. He pulled back, just an inch. Their eyes met, his gaze searching hers. He was checking, even now, to be sure. She gave him a small, trembling smile. He exhaled, a breath he seemed to have been holding since the day he found her in the snow. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation. It was a deep, searingly honest claiming. A kiss that spoke of survival, of shared burdens, and of a future that had, against all odds, been born in the fire. Their free hands found each other at their sides, but it was awkward. He, with his arm in a sling, and she, wrapped in the heavy coat, were clumsy. A small laugh, wet with tears, broke from her. "This coat," she murmured against his mouth. He smiled. "The coat." He helped her shrug it off. It fell to the floor in a heavy, soft pile. A shed skin. Their hands, now free, found each other. They did not fumble. They met on the scarred wooden top of the table, palms sliding together, fingers lacing. A perfect, tight grip. He drew her back to him. He leaned his forehead against hers. They just stood there, in the center of the cabin, their hands locked on the table, breathing the same air. The fight was over. The ghosts were gone. The sleet on the roof had softened, turning to a gentle, melting rain. The cabin was filled with the sound of dripping water and the steady crackle of the fire. The two shadows, a man and a woman, stood pressed together as one, their outlines flickering, melting into each other in the warm, amber light. When Eliza woke, it was to the pale, gray light of dawn. She was in the bed, buried under the heavy wool blankets, warmer than she had ever been in her life. The cabin was quiet, the fire banked to a low, steady glow. She was not alone. Cole was there. He was fully dressed, save for his boots. He was asleep, sitting upright in his chair, his head leaned back against the wall, his broken arm resting in the sling on his lap. He had stayed. He had stood guard all night, even in his exhaustion, even in his pain. He had given her the bed, the safety, the warmth, and he had taken the cold chair for himself. A feeling of such profound, aching tenderness swelled in her chest that it was almost a pain. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. The movement made the old wooden bed frame creak. His eyes snapped open. There was no sleep in them, just immediate, sharp awareness. He saw her. He saw her watching him. He did not apologize. He did not look away. He just looked at her, his gaze soft in the morning light. Eliza pulled the wool blanket tighter. "I am here," she whispered, her voice husky with sleep. "I am here because I choose to be." A slow, tired smile touched his lips. He nodded, pushing himself out of the chair, his movements stiff. He walked to the bed, not to get in, but to stand beside it. "And I," he said, his voice low, "am here, too." He sat on the edge of the bed, his back to her, and pulled on his heavy boots. The simple, domestic act was more intimate than the kiss. They made mint tea, the last of the dried herbs. They moved around each other in a new, easy silence. Juniper, sensing the shift, the peace, came over and laid her head on Eliza's knee, thumping her tail. A family, born of fire and choice. Eliza went to her small pouch, the one she had clung to in the cave. She took out the last piece of her old life, the length of slate blue ribbon. Cole was standing by the window, his good hand nursing the hot tin cup, watching the snow melt from the stable roof. She came up behind him. He turned, wordlessly. She took his right arm, the good one. She looped the soft, faded blue ribbon around his forearm, over the rough canvas of his shirt. Her fingers were deft as she tied a small, tight knot. It was a splash of impossible, delicate color against the harsh, practical brown of his world. A private promise, a bond. He looked at the ribbon. He looked at her. He understood. He set his cup down. With his one good hand, he walked to the table. He picked up the bone-handled knife, his father's knife. He did not give it back to her. He did not put it in his own belt. He walked to the small, locked hutch where he kept his papers and his seed money. He unlocked it, placed the knife inside, and closed the door. The sound of the key turning in the lock was loud in the quiet room. He turned to her, his face clear, the last of the shadows gone. "From now on," Cole Reddick said, "we use it to live, not from fear." The Hickory Bluff Town Hall had been converted for the arrival of the circuit judge. The room was packed, the air thick with the smell of wet wool, tobacco, and hot iron from the overstuffed stove. Men stood 3 deep along the back wall, their hats in their hands. This was not just a trial, it was a reckoning. At the front sat Ephraim Lowe, no longer the slick, polished railroad man. His eyes were shadowed, and he sat beside a lean, expensive-looking lawyer from Cheyenne, who looked profoundly annoyed to be in this muddy, one-street town, in a separate chair, guarded by a deputy, sat Mason Pike. He was sober, which seemed to make him even smaller, his eyes darting like a trapped rat. Eliza sat in the front row, wedged between Cole and Owen Kell. Cole's arm was bound in a clean white sling, a stark reminder of the night of the fire. He was a solid, unmoving presence, his gaze fixed on the judge, his very stillness a promise. Sheriff Ada McCaffrey was the first to testify. She spoke in a clear, clipped monotone, laying out the facts, the forged contract, the discovery of the blue ink, the fraudulent payment ledger found in Silas Merritt's desk, the attempted arson, the capture of Mason Pike at the swamp. Then, Owen Kell was called. The blacksmith dwarfed the witness stand, he explained, in his booming voice. The mechanics of the press. He held up the lead mold found in Silas's desk and the perfect, original steel die he had made for the railroad. This here, he said, holding up the lead mold, is a copy, a sloppy one, made in a hurry. You can see right here where the S slipped, and it was full of red sand. My sand. From my shop. The groundwork was laid. The crime was established. The next witness was Silas Merritt. The station master was brought in, his hands shaking. His testimony was the first blow. He had taken a plea in exchange for a lighter sentence for his role in the conspiracy. He was testifying against Lowe. He told me to do it, Silas whispered, his eyes fixed on the floor. Mr. Lowe, he said the railroad needed to secure its labor. He said it was just paperwork. He gave me $20 in gold to make the seal and to sign the girl's name. He dictated the entry for the payment ledger. Lowe's Cheyenne lawyer scribbled furiously. Then, Mason Pike was allowed to speak. His arrogance, fueled by desperation, returned. He stood, ignoring the judge, and pointed a shaking finger at Cole. This is a setup. He's the one. He owes me money. A $50 debt for hay, 2 years running. He's just trying to protect his asset. He stole my niece to pay what he owes. A murmur went through the room. A debt was a serious thing. Cole did not move. He did not deny it. Sheriff Ada McCaffrey stood. Your Honor, Mr. Pike is correct. A debt of $50 was owed. Mason grinned, triumphant. However, Ada continued, her voice cutting through the room, that debt was settled 6 days ago, before the forged contract was ever presented. She produced a new document. This is a bill of sale, Your Honor, transferring ownership of 2 breeding heifers, valued at $60, from Mr. Reddick to Mr. Pike, thereby clearing the debt. It is signed by Mr. Pike. I never signed that, Mason yelled. You did, Ada said calmly. And just in case your memory was failing, it is also witnessed and notarized by the official town clerk, who is present today, Mrs. Ruth Alder. A small, severe woman in the second row stood up. That is my signature, Your Honor. I witnessed the transaction. The debt is paid. Mason Pike collapsed back into his chair, his face the color of ash. The trap had closed. The prosecution calls, Ada said, her voice softening just a fraction. Miss Eliza Thorne. The room went completely silent. Eliza stood. She felt Cole's hand brush her back, a brief, warm touch of support. She walked to the stand. She did not look like the half-frozen girl from the snowdrift. She was wearing a simple wool skirt and a clean shirt, her hair pulled back. She looked solid. She took the oath, her voice clear. Miss Thorne, Ada began. Please tell the court, in your own words, what happened? Eliza did not look at Mason. She did not look at Lowe. She looked at the judge and at the faces of the townspeople, the jury of her new peers. She spoke. Her voice did not tremble. It was flat, clear, and cold with the truth. My name is Eliza Thorne. My uncle, Mason Pike, told me I was worth $50. He was taking me to the railroad camp to sell me to Mr. Ephraim Lowe. She recounted the journey, the cold, the wagon stopping. He told me I was not worth the feed. He took me by the arm, and he threw me from the wagon into a snowdrift. He left me to die. The room seemed to suck all the air from its lungs. I was found by Mr. Reddick. I was given shelter, Days later, Mr. Pike and Mr. Lowe came to the ranch. Mr. Lowe presented a paper that he claimed I had signed. I had not. It was a forgery. When Sheriff McCaffrey suspended the claim, Mr. Pike, he ran. He shouted that he would burn the ranch to the ground. That night, he came. He and 2 other men. They set fire to the hay barn while Mr. Reddick and I were inside. She told the story. From the wagon bed to the ice on the swamp. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She presented the facts, one by one, like stones being laid for a foundation. When she finished, there was not a sound in the hall. Lowe's lawyer stood. This was his only chance. He could not fight the facts, so he would attack the witness. Miss Thorne, he began, his voice slick and condescending. You say you are 19 years of age. I am. And you are an orphan, are you not, with no family, save for your esteemed uncle? That is correct. So you are, in effect, a runaway. A person with no ties, no property, and no station. He began to pace. And for the past several weeks, you, an unmarried woman, have been living alone with Mr. Reddick, a man to whom you are not related. Eliza's hands tightened in her lap. She saw the play. Is that a question, counselor? The judge asked, his voice dry. It speaks to character. Your Honor, the lawyer said, whirling. Here is a woman who has abandoned her only family. She is living in a compromising situation. Is it not more likely that she is a flighty, ungrateful girl, and that this entire fantastic story is a fabrication, designed to escape her familial duties and secure a more comfortable position for herself? Before Eliza could answer, Ada McCaffrey was on her feet. Objection, Your Honor. The counselor is from Cheyenne. He may not be familiar with the laws of this territory. Ada turned, not to the judge, but to the room. Her voice rang with absolute authority. The Wyoming Territorial Legislature is clear. This is a place of free will. The law protects the agency and the choices of all single women over the age of 18. Miss Thorne's character is not on trial. Her living situation is her right. Her choice, Mr. Lowe's attempt to turn her into a slave, is the only crime here today. The judge nodded. Objection sustained. The witness's personal arrangements are not relevant. The lawyer was sputtering. His attack blunted, but Ada was not finished. She had been holding one last card. Your Honor, Ada said, Mr. Merritt, in his confession, provided one final piece of evidence, a telegraph dispatch he received and held for Mr. Lowe. She produced the thin, yellow paper. It is from an entity called the NPS Consortium, the Northern Pacific Spur. Lowe, for the first time, looked terrified. Ada read the telegram. To E. Lowe. Gold authorized for procurement. Bunkhouse contracts must be filled by end of month. Forcibly recruit if necessary. Full bonus on delivery of 20 head. 20 head, Ada repeated, letting the words hang in the air. As if they were cattle. The room exploded. The ranchers at the back, men who lived and died by their herds, surged forward, their face dark with rage. Slaver, one of them shouted. The judge slammed his gavel. Order, order. He looked at Ephraim Lowe. The trial was over. This court finds Ephraim Lowe guilty of conspiracy to commit forced labor, forgery, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. This court finds Mason Pike guilty of attempted arson, conspiracy and abandonment with intent to kill. He looked at the open statute book. As per the law, I order the immediate and total forfeiture of all assets, contracts, and property held by Ephraim Lowe and Mason Pike within this county. A portion of the proceeds from the auction of said assets will be paid directly to the plaintiff, Miss Eliza Thorne, as restitution for the damages done to her. Eliza felt the world tilt. Restitution. Plaintiff. The words were foreign. The room was buzzing as the judge concluded. Ada and her deputies cuffed up Hale, shaking Ephraim Lowe. Mason Pike was already being dragged out, weeping. Cole stood. His good hand offered to help Eliza from her chair. She was stunned. her ears ringing. Ada walked over, her hard face softened by a small, triumphant smile. "That restitution, Miss Thorne," Ada said, keeping her voice low. "It will not be much. Lowe was smart. Most of his gold is in Cheyenne, but it should be enough." "Enough?" Eliza asked, her voice numb. "I happen to know," Ada said, a casual glint in her eye, "that the county is auctioning off the full water rights to Ash Lantern Creek next week. The previous owner defaulted. With those rights, a rancher could control this whole valley. They could expand. They could build." Eliza looked at Cole. His head had snapped up. He was staring at Ada, his mind clearly racing. The water rights were the lifeblood of the Red Willow Basin. To own them, the townspeople were filing out, but they did not just leave. They walked past Eliza, one by one. The storekeep, Mr. Price, touched his hat. Owen Kell, his face clean, gave her a deep, respectful nod. Ruth Alder, the town clerk, paused and squeezed her arm. They were not offering pity. They were offering respect. Eliza felt her eyes sting. She turned from the townspeople and looked at Cole. He was not looking at the crowd. He was looking at her. His face, which she had first seen as a mask of hard, frontier silence, was open. His gaze held a profound, quiet awe. He did not embrace her. He did not pull her close. This was a public place, a place of law, and he was a man who understood boundaries. Instead, with his broken arm in its sling, he simply, slowly, held out his good right hand. It was an offer, a partnership, a choice. Eliza looked at his calloused palm, the hand that had pulled her from the snow, the hand that had held hers steady as she cried, the hand that had taught her to hold a knife. She smiled, a real, slow, genuine smile. She placed her hand in his. She squeezed. Once, a pact, sealed in justice, and witnessed by the town. Spring did not arrive at Red Willow Ranch. It burst. One day the world was locked in white. The next it was a raging torrent of meltwater. The snow receded, exposing the bruised, matted grass, and the air, for the first time in months, smelled of damp earth and possibility. The restitution money, collected from the auction of Ephraim Lowe's seized assets, had been exactly enough. Eliza had stood beside Cole in the town hall, her hand steady, and signed the paper that made them the owners of the Ash Lantern Creek water rights. The ranch was no longer a sanctuary. It was a future. Life fell into a new rhythm, one of building, not just surviving. Cole. His arm finally healed, though the shoulder would always ache with the cold. Spent his days riding the property line. He worked from dawn until dusk up in Coyote Notch, resetting the fence posts that the deep winter snows had heaved from the ground. Eliza took charge of the new life. The calving season had begun, and the high pasture was full of awkward, spindle-legged creatures. She had read Cole's old almanacs and his father's ledgers, and she had begun her own. She created a rotation chart for the high grasses, ensuring the new mothers had the richest feed. She hung bundles of feverfew and raspberry leaf in the stable, a small arsenal against the milk fever that could steal a calf's mother in the night. They were a partnership. They met on the porch before sunrise, their hands wrapped around hot tin cups of coffee, and spoke of the day's work. He would talk of a breach in the west fence. She would report on a new calf, a red heifer, the smallest of the bunch. There was an easy, quiet understanding. They were two people mending a broken place. The first spring rain began in the middle of the night, a soft, welcome drumming on the roof. By dawn, it was a steady, warm shower. By noon, it was a deluge. Cole was still up in the notch. Eliza was in the stable, checking the feed. When she heard it, it was not the sound of rain. It was a low, distant roar, like a train where no track existed. Juniper, who had been sleeping in the hay, shot to her feet, a low whine in her throat. Eliza ran to the stable door. The world was gone, obscured by a sheet of gray water. The creek, their creek, was no longer a gentle stream. It was a churning, brown monster, overflowing its banks. The roar was coming from the ridge. From Coyote Notch, a wall of mud, rock, and splintered pine trees tore down the mountainside. The flash flood, born of the sudden rain on the hard, still half-frozen ground, was carving a new, violent path, and it was heading straight for the low pasture, where the new calves were huddled, bawling in confusion. "Cole!" she screamed, her voice snatched away by the wind. She saw him. He was on his horse, already riding down from the high ground, his face a mask of grim determination. The fence he had been mending was gone, obliterated. "The calves!" he bellowed, his voice carrying over the storm. "We have to turn them, get them to the bridge." The small wooden bridge that crossed the creek to the high pasture was their only escape, and the water was already licking at its planks. Eliza did not wait for instructions. She grabbed a rope, and with Juniper at her heels, she ran. The herd was in a panic. The small animals were scattered, bleeding, running in circles as the muddy water began to swirl around their legs. They were drifting toward the deepest part of the gully. Cole, on his horse, was the wall. He plunged his mount into the rising water, positioning himself between the herd and the worst of the flood, a living, breathing fence. "Push them! Eliza!" he shouted. "Push them!" Eliza ran, Juniper at her side, a black and white streak. She remembered the sound Cole used, the high, sharp, two-note whistle that could cut through any wind. She put her fingers to her lips and blew. The sound was sharp and clear. Juniper, hearing the command, went to work. She nipped at the heels of the lagging calves, barking, turning them, pushing them away from the gully, toward Cole, who in turn funneled them toward the shuddering bridge, one by one. The terrified animals scrambled across the planks to safety. Eliza counted them. 10, 11, 12. She looked again. "One's missing," she yelled. "The little red one, the smallest." Cole shielded his eyes against the rain. There, the calf had been separated. It had panicked and slid down into a deep sinkhole, a hollow that was quickly becoming a churning pit of cold, thick mud. The calf was screaming, a high, thin sound of pure terror, as the water rose around its belly. Cole spurred his horse, but the animal refused, its eyes rolling, terrified of the unstable ground. "The mud is too soft, I can't get the rope on it from here." Eliza ran to him, grabbing the lariat from his saddle. "I'll go in." "No, it's a bog. It'll take you down." "Eliza, I can't." "He's the anchor," she shouted back, her voice raw. She was already tying the rope, not around the calf, but around her own waist, pulling the knot tight. "I'll get the rope on it. You pull us both out." He looked at her, his eyes wide, a flash of pure fear in them. This was more than a calf. It was their entire future. It was her. She didn't wait for his agreement. She handed him the end of the line and slid down the bank into the sinkhole. The mud was a living thing. It was colder than the snow, a thick, sucking, greedy sludge that grabbed her legs, pulling her down past her knees, to her waist. She gasped, fighting the panic. She slogged forward, each step an agonizing battle. The small calf was frantic, its eyes white. "Easy," she murmured, her voice a low, calming sound. "Easy. Now. I've got you." She reached the calf. The mud was at her chest. She looped the other end of the lariat under the calf's belly, her fingers numb, fumbling with the knot. She got it secure. "I'm set," she screamed to Cole. Cole was off his horse, his feet dug into the solid bank. He was the anchor. He wrapped the rope around his good arm, his entire body braced. "Now, Cole, pull." "On my count," he yelled. 1, 2, 3. He heaved, his muscles bulging, the veins standing out on his neck. Eliza felt the rope go taut, cutting into her waist. She grabbed the calf with both hands and pushed, using her last ounce of strength, while Cole pulled. The mud held them. It was a greedy, sucking sound. "Again," he roared. 1, 2, 3. He put his entire soul into the pull. The suction broke. The calf, in a wave of brown filth, scrambled free, landing on the bank. Cole did not stop. He kept pulling, hand over hand, dragging Eliza from the pit. She collapsed onto the solid grass, gasping, covered from head to toe in black, freezing mud. She was alive, The calf was alive. She looked at Cole. He was covered in mud, his face splattered, his chest heaving. The rain, as if a curtain had been drawn, stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, brilliant and sudden. A sound bubbled up in Eliza's chest. It was a choked, hysterical sound. She started to laugh. Cole stared at her, this creature of mud and fury, and his own grim face broke. A deep, rumbling laugh burst from him. They sat there, two muddy, exhausted children, and laughed until their sides ached, the sound echoing in the clean, washed air. Later, after the calf was dried and with its mother, they stood on the porch. The flood had passed. The gully was a new scar on the land, but the creek was already receding, settling back into its new, wider banks. Cole pointed with his chin at the water. "That's what a life is, I reckon." Eliza looked at him. "The water's always going to run," he said, his voice low. "It's always going to try and cut a new path, wash you out. All you can do is try to build the bank stronger." He turned, his gaze meeting hers. The laughter gone, replaced by a quiet, solid truth. And choose who you stand next to while you're doing it. The celebration was not planned. It just happened. The flood had taken out the old spring house, and Cole had planned to build a new, larger storehouse for their expanding herd. One morning, Owen Kell arrived in his wagon, not with iron, but with a load of fresh-cut lumber. "Heard you needed a hand," he boomed. By noon, half of Hickory Bluff was at Red Willow Ranch. It was a raising. The men, led by Cole and Owen, set the posts and raised the beams. The women, led by Ada McCaffrey and Ruth Alder, set up long tables of food. The ranch, once a place of isolation, was filled with shouts, the ring of hammers, and the smell of sawdust and fresh-baked apple pie. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the last rafter was set. The storehouse was standing. Owen Kell wiped his brow, took a long drink of water, and then pulled a harmonica from his shirt pocket. He sat on a nail keg and began to play. A simple, sweet, soaring tune. Ada, her face flushed from the heat of the cooking fire, sliced into a massive apple pie. Ruth Alder, the town clerk, stood on the porch and read a short poem she had written, not about gods or heroes, but about clean water and the strength of roots. Eliza stood beside Cole, watching. This was their community. These were their friends. Later, the crowd had thinned. The lanterns, strung between the cabin and the new building, cast a warm, golden glow. Eliza found Cole by the cabin door, quietly watching the party. She held something in her hand. "The night of the fire," she said. "I thought everything was gone." He looked at her, waiting. She opened her hand. In her palm lay the single, heavy coin, pressed in the year of her birth. It was the last thing from her mother's pouch, the last token of her old, broken life. "This was for the end," she said. "The last thing I had." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the lantern light. "I want it to be for the beginning, for our first year." She pressed the coin into his hand. Cole looked at it, the metal warm from her skin. He understood the offering. She was giving him the last piece of her past as a key to their future. He did not put it in his pocket. He went into the cabin, found a single, small iron nail, and his hammer. He stood on the porch, reached up, and with one precise, gentle tap, he drove the nail into the wooden lintel, just above the door. He hung the coin from it, where it spun, catching the light. "A charm," he said, his voice thick. "To bless the house, to bless our new year." Owen's harmonica music softened, turning into a slow, simple waltz. Cole turned to her. His mended arm was stiff, but his right hand was steady. "Miss Thorne," he said, a small, shy smile on his face. "I am not much of a dancer." "Neither am I. Mr. Reddick," she whispered. He held out his good arm. She took it. They stepped off the porch and into the center of the yard. The remaining townspeople stepped back, giving them space, watching. This was not a secret, hidden in the shadows. This was a public declaration. He put his hand on her waist. She put hers on his shoulder. They began to move, a slow, clumsy, perfect circle. She rested her head against his chest, and he leaned his forehead against hers. They closed their eyes, moving as one, in their own world. Surrounded by the warm light and the soft music, he stopped. Though the music continued, he tilted her chin up. The kiss was not the desperate, smoky kiss of the fire's aftermath. It was gentle. It was sweet. It was as public as the coin over the door and as quiet as the poem Ruth had read. It was a promise, seen and witnessed. From far away, down in the valley, a sound cut through the night, the high, lonely whistle of the train. Cole looked up, toward the sound. "Hickory Bluff is changing," he said. "The railroad is coming through, no matter what Lowe did." Eliza did not look at the train. She looked at the new storehouse. She looked at the cabin, with the coin glinting over the door. She looked at the dark line of Ash Lantern Creek, their creek flowing steadily, a silver ribbon in the moonlight. "Let it change," she said, leaning back into his arms. "They cannot touch us here. This is ours." The wheels of justice in the territory moved faster than a winter storm. Ephraim Lowe, stripped of his fine coat and his arrogance, was taken to the territorial prison in Cheyenne, his name a curse in the mouths of the railroad men he had cheated. His assets, and those of the shadow consortium he worked for, were seized and auctioned. The county fund, under Ada McCaffrey's careful eye, swelled. She did not use the money to build a bigger jail. She bought the Golden Nugget Saloon, the very place Lowe had recruited his hired thugs. She had its gaudy red paint covered in whitewash, its poker tables thrown into the street. A new sign was hung, painted by Ruth Alder, Hickory Bluff Voluntary Labor House, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. It became a hiring hall, a clean bunkhouse, and a mess hall, supervised by Ada herself, ensuring that the railroad, in its greed, had accidentally funded the very thing it sought to destroy: free, organized, and protected labor. Mason Pike was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. The night of the fire, the ice of the swamp, and the sudden, terrifying withdrawal of alcohol had broken him. He was a hollowed-out man, haunted and shaking. The day before he was transferred, Ruth Alder visited the town jail. She did not speak to him. She simply passed a single, sealed envelope through the bars. He opened it with trembling hands. The handwriting was clear, strong, and unfamiliar. It was Eliza's. "Mason, I will not see you. I will not send you comfort. After this day, I will not think of you again. I am writing this to tell you that I choose to forgive you. I am not doing this for your sake. I am doing this for mine. I forgive you so that I can be free of you. I do not forgive you so that you can forget what you have done." He read the words, his lips moving, but his mind could not grasp them. He had expected rage, or pleas, or curses. He did not know how to process mercy that was also a judgment. He was still staring at the paper when the deputies came to take him away. A man already erased by the future he had tried to burn. At Red Willow Ranch, the world was being rebuilt. The scar from the fire break was already turning green with new grass. The mended stables smelled of fresh-cut pine. Cole and Eliza stood at the main gate, by the road. Cole, his arm now free from the sling, held a heavy, newly painted plank steady. Eliza, her hand sure, finished the last letter in clear, black script. They stepped back. The sign read, "Red Willow Cooperative." Owen Kell, who had planed the wood for them, had used a hot iron to brand a smaller line beneath it. "Proprietor C. Reddick E. Thorne." "Cooperative," Cole said, testing the word. It felt good in his mouth. "Working together. It means sharing what we build," Eliza said, cleaning her brush. "It means a safe harbor." The ranch was no longer a sanctuary for two. It was becoming a beacon, with the restitution funds. Eliza had not bought a new dress or jewelry. She had bought 2 heavy-duty sewing machines from the Sears Roebuck catalog. Cole had taken the timber from the flood debris and built a new, clean bunkhouse, the one he had once designed for May, now repurposed. They had made a pact. This would be a place where women, traveling the territory, caught in bad situations, or simply alone, could come. It was not charity, it was a trade, a warm bed, 3 hot meals a day, and safety. In exchange for work, they could learn to mend leather, to herd and brand, to keep the complex books of a growing ranch, and they would receive a fair share of the profits from their own labor. The frontier rumor mill, faster and more potent than any telegraph, carried the story, the tale of the woman who had survived the blizzard, who had faced down the railroad, and who was building a new kind of refuge. 2 months later, in the deep, velvet heat of the first true summer, the rumor bore fruit. Eliza was weeding the small herb garden she had planted by the porch when Juniper let out a low, curious whine. A figure was stumbling up the path from the creek. It was a girl, perhaps 16 years old, named Maribel Quinn. She had walked for 3 days, following the story, after her father had tried to trade her to a whiskey runner. The girl's feet were a bloody, blistered ruin. When she saw Eliza, she collapsed by the gate, her eyes wide with a familiar, haunted terror. Eliza did not run to her. She did not overwhelm her. She walked slowly, calmly. She saw the girl's fear and respected it. She went inside the cabin. She returned a moment later. She did not carry bandages. She carried a thick gray wool shawl she had woven on her own loom, and a steaming bowl of rich antelope soup. Maribel flinched, trying to push herself backward as Eliza approached. Eliza stopped. She kept a safe distance. She set the bowl down on the ground, just within the girl's reach. Then, gently, she unfolded the shawl and draped it over the girl's thin, trembling shoulders. "You're safe," Eliza said, her voice low and soft. The girl looked up, her gaze frantic, searching Eliza's face for the trick. The price. Eliza met her gaze. "You're safe now?" The words, spoken with the absolute authority of one who knew, broke the girl's terror. A deep, agonizing sob tore from her chest, the sound of a dam breaking. Eliza sat on the ground beside her, not touching, just waiting. She let the girl cry, a silent, steady presence, until the storm passed. The old symbols of the ranch were repurposed. Cole took the heavy walking plow, the one he had used to cut the fire break, and sharpened its blade until it shone. He did not return it to the shed. He hung it on the wall of the new storehouse, a tool of defense that had become a promise of harvest. He went into the cabin. He took down the heavy shearling coat, his coat, the one that had been her first salvation, her cocoon. He held it in his hands, feeling the weight of that first night, the memory of her body, rigid and half frozen. He took it outside. He hung it on a new thick iron hook that Owen Kell had made, a hook drilled directly into the main post of the porch, right by the door. It was not his coat, or her coat, any longer. It was the ranch's, it was the symbol of the safe fire, hanging by the door, an open offer of warmth to any soul who came knocking in the dead of winter. That evening, as the sun began to touch the jagged peaks of the mountains, Cole and Eliza walked. They climbed the low, grassy hill behind the cabin. Their hill, the place where the new grass grew thickest. Juniper ranged ahead, happy, chasing a rabbit. They stood side by side, looking down. The Red Willow Cooperative was spread out below them, a picture of life. The creek, their creek, was a ribbon of molten gold in the fading light. The new storehouse, the mended stable, the small, neat bunkhouse where a light already glowed, and the cabin, its chimney breathing a thin, steady curl of welcome smoke. Eliza slipped her hand into Cole's, their fingers interlaced, a familiar, easy fit. "From the cold," Eliza said, her voice quiet, almost to herself. "From the ice and the fear and the fire, we built a place warm enough to share." Cole turned, his gaze full of a quiet, profound awe. He looked at this woman, who had been a brittle, frozen thing, and who was now the strongest person he had ever known. He drew her in. This was not the desperate, smoky embrace of the fire's aftermath. This was not the shy, public dance of the raising. This was the quiet, solid embrace of home. He wrapped his arms around her, and she rested her head on his shoulder. her cheek against the solid warmth of his chest. They stood as one, their breathing even. Two trees that had intertwined, their roots locked together deep in the earth. He tilted her chin up. The kiss was long, deep, and complete. It held no questions and no fear. It was a kiss of absolute knowledge, a private, silent vow made with the entire, vast sky as their witness. They did not linger. The kiss ended, and they turned, hands locked again, and walked back down the hill. There was work to do. As they reached the cabin, the sounds of the evening began. The gentle, rhythmic thunk, thunk, thunk of Eliza grinding corn for the morning's bread. Cole's low, easy laughter as he watched Juniper, who, having given up on the rabbit, was now trying to entice Maribel to play. The girl, her feet bandaged, sat on the porch, a small, shy smile touching her lips. The ranch was a tapestry of interwoven lives. From the front gate, Ada McCaffrey, who had ridden out to check on the new arrival, raised a hand, tipping her hat in a silent, respectful salute before turning her horse back to town. From the stable, the clear, bright clang. Clang. Clang of Owen's hammer rang out. He was affixing new, heavy iron hinges to the bunkhouse door, his payment taken in 2 of Eliza's apple pies. From that same bunkhouse, a light glowed. Ruth Alder had hung a small, neat sign on the door, reading and writing, Thursday nights. She was sitting with Maribel, patiently guiding her hand as she learned to write her own name. The summer wind blew up from the valley, carrying the sweet, rich scent of curing hay and the unmistakable, warm promise of cornbread baking in the oven. The sun dipped below the western ridge, its last, golden rays striking the new sign by the road, making the letters glow, Red Willow Ranch Safe Harbor. Eliza stood at the threshold of the cabin. She stood in the exact spot where the blizzard had once tried to tear its way in, the exact spot she had tried to flee in her panic. She watched as another wagon, a small, rickety thing, crested the ridge, a woman, alone, holding the reins, looked toward the light in the cabin, her face a mask of exhaustion and hope. Eliza turned. She stepped onto the porch. She took the heavy, shearling-lined coat from its hook. She walked out to meet the wagon. The woman stopped, her hands tightening on the reins. Afraid. Eliza smiled, a smile of absolute understanding. She reached up, and as the new arrival looked at her, her eyes wide, Eliza wrapped the coat of her own salvation around the woman's shoulders. You're safe now. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us connect and share our thoughts in the comments below. Please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video, and give it a boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this tale.